Let's abandon the pretense that this entire situation was simply a random accident. The beginning of 2026 delivered far more than just whispers, it produced tangible documentation. I am referring to freshly surfaced maritime images that have seemingly never appeared online before today. These were not recycled tabloid snapshots or grainy captures that the public has debated for years. These appear to be high-resolution files leaked from private archives, positioning Meghan Markle on luxury vessels in the Mediterranean. Inside these exclusive zones are spaces most individuals will never access regardless of their work ethic. Let us remain incredibly precise, right from the start, regarding the timeline of these photographs. They do not originate from her tenure within the royal family, nor her life after finding fame. They are not from her married life, but rather span from approximately 2008 through 2012. These are the exact years she publicly identified as a striving actress trying to make ends meet in Hollywood. At this point, the narrative ceases to be a charming story of luck and becomes complex. These maritime excursions were not casual floating birthday celebrations open to the general public. They were certainly not charitable mixers designed for ordinary social engagement or fundraising efforts. According to observers familiar with this lifestyle, these were closed networking vessels attended by international tycoons. You cannot simply purchase a ticket to enter these kinds of highly restricted environments. You are selected to be there based on specific criteria set by the hosts. Therefore, the relevant inquiry is not whether she was on the vessel, but rather who facilitated her presence. Before anyone rushes to attribute this discussion to bias or resentment, take a moment to pause. This conversation is not about personal criticism, but rather about timing access and the significance of silence. Silence communicates a narrative all on its own, without needing a single word. If these images were completely innocuous and easily explained as casual networking, her team would likely be speaking. However, they remain quiet, and that lack of response is exactly why this leak is significant. This is the moment where the story shifts from theoretical speculation to a matter of basic mathematics. Between the years of 2008 and 2012, her documented income was derived from minor roles and brief appearances. She was not yet an A-list celebrity, nor was she the lead star of a major series. She was not independently wealthy during that specific period of her career development. Yet, these images place her on vessels valued at millions, attending gatherings with astronomical costs. Let us pose the question plainly, because it seems no one else is willing to ask it. Who provided the financial backing for these excursions, since cable television wages do not fund such luxury? Game show appearances do not typically bankroll summers spent on the European yachting circuit. Aspiring performers do not accidentally drift into such exclusive global circles without substantial sponsorship. Someone covered the travel expenses, and someone facilitated the necessary access to these groups. Someone ensured her presence was secured within these highly guarded social perimeters. Before anyone attempts to dismiss this by stating that networking is standard industry practice, consider the scale. While networking is indeed normal, this specific tier of social interaction is strategic, expensive, and intentional. Here is the aspect of the situation that carries the most weight regarding her history. This was not an isolated incident, as the photos reportedly span across several different years. This implies it was not merely assistance, but rather a sustained form of investment in her potential. When you observe that level of investment, you naturally begin to question what the expected return was. Power dynamics rarely involve giving so generously without the expectation of receiving something in return. Let us dismantle the primary narrative often used to soften the implications of this story. This was likely not just a young professional hustling in Hollywood or being in the right place. According to those who study elite social circuits, her involvement fits a very specific operational profile. That profile has a designated name within those circles known as strategic social positioning. These are environments where individuals are introduced for specific reasons rather than random chance. You are brought into the fold because someone believes you can serve a function socially or reputationally. Once you are on the inside, you are quietly evaluated on your ability to adapt. They observe how you speak, how you listen, and who you naturally gravitate toward in the room. The recently surfaced photos reveal a truth that some might find uncomfortable to acknowledge. She does not appear to be an outsider looking in with a sense of wonder. She does not look like someone who stumbled into the room by sheer luck or accident. She appears comfortable and seems to be someone who fully understands the dynamics of the room. She seems to grasp the hierarchy and understands exactly who holds influence and who does not. Observers describe her demeanor not as a passing guest, but as a consistent presence. She appears as someone who knew how to remain discreet and build ongoing relationships without leaving trails. This distinction matters because appearing repeatedly in these spaces implies she was a fixture. People generally do not keep you around in these exclusive circles unless you provide some form of value. Now, let us discuss the company kept in those rooms as the story becomes specific. This is the chapter that mainstream entertainment reporting often chooses to overlook or ignore. The photos allegedly place her at private gatherings, attended by international investors and global figures. These were not public venues or charity galas, but private vessels during peak seasons. She was alongside facilitators known for connecting rising talents with international power players. Let us state this clearly without lowering our voices or using ambiguous language. You do not attend gatherings with such powerful global elites unless you are thoroughly vetted. You must be vouched for and deemed safe, useful, and above all else, discreet. This is not typical celebrity culture, but rather the culture of international influence and power. In those circles, discretion is the most valuable currency anyone can possess. When photos leak years later, it signals that the dynamic has fundamentally shifted. These are the same networks that usually bury potential scandals so deep they disappear. This means someone within those networks decided that the previous protection is no longer necessary. That reality should make anyone paying close attention pause and reflect on the implications. The question is no longer if she was there as the photos settle that debate. The question now focuses on what alliances were formed and why they are being exposed. Global elites generally do not allow loose ends to dangle without a reason. If discretion is removed, it is usually because someone violated an unwritten agreement. Once that protection is withdrawn, everything becomes vulnerable to public scrutiny. Here is where the concept of coincidence officially dissolves into a calculated pattern. After years of appearing in these elite international circles, things began to accelerate for her. In 2011, she secured a significant role in a major television legal drama. This did not happen through the traditional grind, but seemingly after years of elite networking. Suddenly, after navigating these high-level social currents, she secures the role that becomes her launchpad. Fast forward the timeline, and by 2016, she is introduced to Prince Harry. That introduction did not come through chance or royalty or standard casting agents. It came through an exclusive members club and the well-connected figure at its center. Let us be realistic about what that institution represents beyond hospitality. It is not merely a restaurant, but a gatekeeping network designed to merge influence and media. She did not walk into that establishment as a rookie without understanding the game. By then, she had nearly a decade of experience navigating elite power spaces and reading rooms. She had learned how to cultivate relationships and position herself as someone worth elevating. So when people claim she was overwhelmed by the hierarchy, it does not align with evidence. The idea that she was naive to power contradicts the timeline of her social ascent. Individuals who thrive in international yacht circuits do not get blindsided by palace dynamics. They get strategic, and that brings us to the most critical part of this narrative. The issue is not what happened in the past, but why it is surfacing now. Leaks of this magnitude do not happen when people are merely angry. They happen when they are finished. These images did not surface in 2015, nor did they appear during the royal wedding. They did not surface during her major televised interviews when interest was at its peak. They surfaced in early 2026, just as she began pushing a new brand image. Just as she attempted a soft reset and a carefully curated comeback, the timing struck. That timing is likely not random, but rather precise and surgical in its execution. According to sources familiar with these circles, these images were likely held in reserve for years. They were protected and treated as confidential material never to be discussed publicly. Yet here they are, released not all at once, but just enough to spark questions. This controlled release tells us something very important about the intent behind it. Someone is not trying to destroy her overnight, but is instead applying calculated pressure. This was not exposure for the sake of outrage, but exposure used as leverage. It serves as a reminder that silence was conditional, and conditions change. When such pressure is applied, the next thing to watch for is the response. Let us discuss the silence, as there has been no denial and no clarification. There has been no attempt to contextualize the images, and that silence is telling. That lack of response is likely not confusion, but rather a form of calculation. If these photos showed innocent networking, her public relations team would be speaking. If there were harmless explanations, those narratives would already be circulating in the media. If there were documents to counter this narrative, they would be presented immediately. Instead, there is absolute silence while the images are analyzed by the public. Silence acts as a strategy only when you expect the story to eventually fade away. But this story is not fading because it is built on evidence rather than speculation. The longer the silence stretches, the louder the unanswered questions become for everyone watching. Who paid for the access, and why is no one issuing a denial? When a denial does not arrive, public attention naturally shifts to what else exists. Here is the part that should concern observers far more than what has been released. Sources claim these photos are likely not the full extent of the archive. They are fragments meant to demonstrate authenticity without revealing the entire collection. According to individuals familiar with these circles, additional documentation may exist. Travel records and correspondence could witness how these connections were built and maintained. The chilling reality is that the people controlling this information do not need validation. They do not need applause or to trend on social media platforms. They simply need her to understand that they still possess the remaining materials. When discretion ends in elite circles, it typically ends quietly, one release at a time. This is not merely a scandal unfolding, but rather a warning phase in action. This brings us to the underlying truth sitting beneath all of these events. The truth that does not need a direct accusation to be effectively devastating. Power has a long memory, and it remembers exactly who was protected and elevated. It remembers who broke the rules after the doors were opened for them. For years, her past stayed buried beneath new titles and careful narrative control. But narratives do not erase history, they only delay its eventual arrival. These photos did not emerge because people were curious, but because silence expired. Once silence is gone, the past stops being private and becomes relevant public interest. This is not about the vessels themselves, nor is it entirely about the money involved. It is about access and who decided they were done protecting the story. Because when those who once guarded your past decide they are finished staying quiet, they wait. They release just enough to let the truth breathe. And that is what we watch. This is likely not an ending, but rather the beginning of a larger revelation. If this is what they were willing to show, imagine what they are still holding.